Chapter 9:11. Nan Yunchuan was unwilling to leave the courtyard that Her Majesty the Empress bought for him to recuperate. He thought that if he stayed here, even if he couldn't see Her Majesty the Empress, he could still spend the rest of his time reminiscing. Tang Nuoyu came several times. Later, she found that Nan Yunchuan seemed to have lost his fighting spirit. She also lost interest. In her previous life, this man was not so emotional. Everything he did was cruel and merciless. He schemed against the Empress, deceived her with sweet words, and personally led the soldiers to surround Her Majesty the Empress's palace. The young Empress was unwilling to become a captive, nor was she willing to show weakness in front of them. She was even more unwilling to be held hostage by them to admit her mistakes and boost their morale. In front of all of them, the 18-year-old Empress pulled out her sword and committed suicide. Before dying, the young Empress only said one sentence, "I'm sorry, Mother Empress." Even if Tang Nuoyu was reborn, she still couldn't understand what the Empress's last sentence meant. If it were her, she wouldn't have the courage of the Empress to cut her own neck with a knife. At that time, Nan Yunchuan watched the Empress commit suicide without blinking. She looked at the dazed Nan Yunchuan, who was wiping the things that the Empress gave him over and over again, and her heart was filled with doubts. They were clearly the same person, but why was there such a big difference? What had changed in the middle that caused Nan Yunchuan to be unable to recover after losing the Empress? "What's the use of you doing this?" Tang Nuoyu squatted down. "I thought you liked me. I didn't expect you to like Her Majesty the Empress. Then why did you come to approach me? Isn't it good for you to stay by the Empress's side?" Nan Yunchuan raised his head in a daze and looked at Tang Nuoyu. "Yes, why did I provoke you? Why didn't I stay by the Empress's side? Why did I do all of this and completely lose her? So, why is that? Why?" Nan Yunchuan was stunned for a moment, then suddenly laughed wildly. Tears came out of his eyes. Why? It's ridiculous. Why? It was to restore the dignity of men, so that the men of the West Holy Empire, like the men of other countries, would stand at the top and become the ruler of the West Holy Empire. In conclusion, there was only one word to describe it: power. "You really don't want to return to the residence with me?" Tang Nuoyu held her cheeks and said. "The Empress has already given the order. You are now a member of the Moon King's residence." "I'm not leaving," Nan Yunchuan said in a low voice as he continued to wipe the white jade chessboard in his hand. This was the Empress' most treasured possession, yet she had given it to him without any hesitation. He clearly knew that the Empress was treating him better and better. At that time, he only had thoughts of using power to overthrow the rule of the West Holy Empire. If he had calmed down, would things have turned out this way? When Su Qing heard the news of Nan Yunchuan's death, she could not believe it. He did not leave the palace and did not know the situation outside the palace. Because Nan Yunchuan was very important, he had no choice but to use his own spies to investigate what was going on. When he found out the truth, it was even more unacceptable than Nan Yunchuan's death. The Empress bumped into Nan Yunchuan and Tang Nuoyu being intimate, and even announced his death on the spot. However, because she cared too much about him and could not bear for him to die, and because Tang Nuoyu was her biological sister, she actually gave Nan Yunchuan to Tang Nuoyu. Su Qing frowned. Nan Yunchuan was finally crippled. Chapter 9:12. No matter what the other party did, he could no longer gain the Empress's trust. He decided that in a few days, while he was out of the palace, he would personally visit Nan Yunchuan. "Your Majesty, are you not sad?" Jing Cheng knew about these things, but he never thought that Nan Yunchuan would actually hook up with Tang Nuoyu. With his brain, it was not difficult to guess what Nan Yunchuan wanted to do. Hooking up with Tang Nuoyu was definitely not purely because he liked Tang Nuoyu, but because he wanted to use Tang Nuoyu's identity. Using Tang Nuoyu to deal with the Empress was just a fight between two sisters. If it was a man who directly went against the Empress, then the world would not go against him. Everyone could understand that the former was easier and more justifiable, especially for a woman like Tang Nuoyu who didn't seem to be very smart. But, was it really not working? Jing Cheng narrowed his eyes. He always felt that this Tang Nuoyu was a bit strange. She looked like a simple and ignorant person, But in reality, it still needed to be investigated. What are you sad about? Tang Guo didn't seem to mind and ate her food. These things have long been expected. Jing Cheng hesitated for a moment and asked, then, was your Majesty sincere to Nan Yunchuan from the beginning? Or did you just want to use his kindness to see what choice he would make in the end? Imperial husband, you may not understand, but I am sincere to everyone. As for what choice the other party makes, that's just a matter of convenience. Your Majesty has cared about Nan Yunchuan? Tang Guo understood the meaning behind his words. So Imperial husband cares about this? Naturally. Jing Cheng didn't hide it at all. Your Majesty is too attractive. Jing Cheng can't help but care. You promised that you can only be mine in the future. I have to pay attention to you at all times and can't change your mind. I don't have feelings for Nan Yunchuan, so Jing Cheng can rest assured. I said that I will only be good to you, so I know that I will only be good to you. Facing this kind of cute guy, Tang Guo was still very patient. Do you believe it? I believe whatever your Majesty says. System, this is awareness. Chasing a wife must be so shameless to succeed. Both of them were in a good mood. What does your Majesty plan to do next? Jing Cheng asked because there was still Su Qing in the palace. Su Qing was a little different from Nan Yunchuan. She seemed to be a sentimental person, but in fact, Su Qing's heart was very hard. Let's see what he's going to do. Tang Guo smiled. No matter what the result is, it's their own choice. What do you think, Jing Cheng? Yes, Jing Cheng replied. Wasn't that right? If Nan Yunchuan didn't want to overthrow the Empress's rule, there wouldn't be such a result. The news he received was that after that incident, Nan Yunchuan was unable to recover from the setback. Every day, he would hide in that courtyard, foolishly fiddling with the items that the Empress gave him. So, why bother? As for Su Qing, he believed that in front of such an outstanding Empress, no matter how hard her heart was, she would still be moved. When the Empress said that she was good to a person, she meant it from the bottom of her heart. No matter who it was impossible for them not to be moved by sincerity. They only cared about quantity and quantity. Within 2 days, Su Qing left the palace. He first returned home, and then secretly went to Nan Yunchuan's courtyard. After entering, he saw Nan Yunchuan sitting in a sorry state in the middle of a pile of rare items, stroking those things over and over again. Brother Yunchuan. Su Qing went up and grabbed Nan Yunchuan's collar. Her cold voice sounded, have you forgotten what we want to do? Chapter 9:13. Brother Yunchuan, have you forgotten that you were born inferior to women? Have you forgotten that you were mocked by those women? Have you forgotten that because you are a man, you had to be sent to the palace? Have you forgotten the grievance in your heart? Brother Yunchuan, wake up. The Empress is heartless to begin with. Now, she is just revealing her true colors ahead of time. Even if there was no previous incident, she would have abandoned you sooner or later. Nan Yunchuan was still unmoved. He stroked a piece of beautiful jade in his hand. This was given to him by Her Majesty on his birthday. Seeing this, Su Qing snatched the beautiful jade into her hands. Nan Yunchuan only felt that his hands were empty, and his dull gaze finally recovered. Su Qing was delighted. Brother Yunchuan. Again. Give me back the jade. This was a birthday gift from Her Majesty. It was his 18th birthday gift. Nan Yunchuan, please wake up. Su Qing looked at the jade in her hand and was angry. She raised her hand and was about to throw the jade away. Nan Yunchuan directly pounced on her. He grabbed Su Qing's wrist and was about to snatch the jade. Su Qing pinched the jade hard. Seeing this, Nan Yunchuan directly bit her wrist. Su Qing was in so much pain that she had no choice but to let go. Nan Yunchuan snatched the jade in his hand and smiled blankly. He held the jade in his hand as if he had obtained a treasure. He kissed it and touched it on his face. He said very softly, I won't let you be snatched away. He had lost Her Majesty and could not lose it again. Every item that Her Majesty gave him, he would keep it well and treasure it. He would never allow anyone to hurt it. Nan Yunchuan, you. Su Qing could not believe it. Looking at the wound on her wrist, She felt that Nan Yunchuan had gone crazy. For a dead object, she actually bit his wrist crazily and did not let go. If he really did not let go, the other party would probably bite off his wrist. Do you know what you are doing? Nan Yunchuan thought of Su Qing's behavior just now and his expression turned cold. Get out. What did you say? Su Qing suspected that she had heard wrongly and had to ask again. She still heard Nan Yunchuan say, Get out, I told you to get out. You are not allowed to take another step in here. You're telling me to scram just for an empress? Nan Yunchuan looked at Su Qing indifferently. You don't deserve to mention her. After a pause, his eyes dimmed. I don't deserve to mention her either. We don't deserve to talk about her, and we don't deserve to be with her. You're crazy. You're crazy. You actually like her. You're forgetting your dreams for her. I'm crazy. Only now do I understand how meaningless it is to live without her in my life. Only after losing her did I realize that there was actually someone who treated me so well in this world. Su Qing's face was gloomy. In the end, she only glanced at Nan Yunchuan, who was immersed in those objects, and left. She was just an empress. What was so good about her? He did not believe that Nan Yunchuan would be so infatuated just because the empress was good. Without Nan Yunchuan, he would do it himself. Xiao Jin was also working together with him. It couldn't be that Xiao Jin had been bewitched by the empress, right? Even if it would be more difficult in the future, he would be able to overthrow the empress's rule with his own ability. After that day, Su Qing often appeared by the empress's side and became a popular person by the empress's side. Because of Nan Yunchuan's example, he always guarded his heart. Every moment, he would remind himself not to follow in Nan Yunchuan's footsteps. He would definitely be able to obtain the empress's heart while guarding his own heart. Chapter 9:14. He was different from Nan Yunchuan. He had truly lived under the oppression of women since he was young. So he would never be willing to be ruled by a woman. He reminded himself every day that he must not fall into the trap of the empress's gentleness. He thought that he was very successful. At least half a year had passed. He was the empress's favorite, but he had kept his heart and did not fall into it like Nan Yunchuan. And he would not be like Nan Yunchuan, crazy because of the empress. He, Su Qing, would never be able to become a person like Nan Yunchuan. He wanted to overthrow the empress's rule, stand at the top of the world, and regain the dignity of a man. He tried to curry favor with the empress, trying to gain her sincerity and trust, while secretly dealing with Tang Nuoyu. After learning a lesson from Nan Yunchuan, he would never let the empress see such a scene. He was very careful with every step, and his calculations were perfect. He put on a disguise that no one, not even himself, could recognize. He thought it was very successful. One day, he suddenly realized that the empress was distracted while listening to his zither. The smile in the empress's eyes was definitely not because of him. It was definitely not because of him. Was it because of Nan Yunchuan? He did not miss this and broke one of the strings at that time. Su Qing. Tang Guo came back to her senses and looked at Su Qing's bleeding finger. She quickly said, "Call the imperial physician." She looked at Su Qing with some blame. "How can you be so careless? Don't play the zither in the future. If Su Qing doesn't play the zither, your majesty won't have any zither to listen to. As long as your majesty likes it, Su Qing is willing to do anything." He lied to the empress. Tang Guo said, "If you hurt your hand every time because of listening to the zither, it's better not to listen. The zither is not as important as you." Su Qing was stunned. He didn't know what to say about the excuse he had made up. He looked at his finger, which was wrapped in a handkerchief by the empress to stop the bleeding. He didn't know what to say. "Don't touch the zither for the next few months." Tang Guo said to the chief steward, "Take away Su Qing's zither for me. When he recovers, return the zither to him." After saying that, she asked Su Qing, "Do you have anything else you like? I'll have someone find it for you." "No." Su Qing replied and allowed the imperial physician to help him open the red handkerchief, apply medicine, and bandage it. He stared at the handkerchief that was thrown to the side, somewhat lost in thought. But he quickly reacted, and the ripples in his eyes returned to calmness. He, Su Qing, would never succumb to the Empress's gentleness. He lowered his head. He couldn't continue like this. He had to think of a way to take things one step further. In fact, he was a little scared. He would never become someone like Nan Yunchuan. He had to make the Empress trust him completely as soon as possible. It seemed that he could only take the risk. Your Majesty, is what you said just now true? Whatever Su Qing wants, you will give it to her? Tang Guo was a little surprised, but then she nodded. Of course. Su Qing wants to go out of the palace with your Majesty, is that okay? Every time, Su Qing went out alone and never went out with His Majesty. Su Qing lowered her eyes. He would arrange it well. A good show was waiting for their Empress. System, TSK, a good show is coming. Tang Guo stared at Su Qing and said, Okay, when do you want to go out? Is it up to me? Yes. Su Qing seemed a little happy. 3 days later, is that okay? Chapter 9:15. Tomorrow, I'm going to take Su Qing out to play. As usual, Jing Cheng walked back after practicing his swordsmanship and heard Tang Guo say this. Now, he still practiced his swordsmanship at the same time every day. The difference was that when he practiced his swordsmanship in the past, the only people who waited and watched were the palace servants who served him. Now, as long as His Majesty was free, he would sneak here to watch him practice his swordsmanship. In the past, he did not prepare any flower tea in the palace. Now, he had all kinds of flower tea in the palace. In the past, he practiced his swordsmanship because he liked it. When he practiced his swordsmanship, he felt extremely carefree. If there was no sword, it would be boring in this cold palace. Now, other than what he liked, there was also a very important person to him who would watch from the side. His Majesty would smile and say to him, "The way you dance with your sword is so handsome." Because of her words, his sword moves went from simple to complicated. Not only did each move have to be practical, they also had to look good. Every time he turned his head, he would be able to meet that pair of especially bright eyes, which only reflected his shadow. Your Majesty, are you afraid that I will misunderstand something by telling me this? Jing Cheng handed the sword to the palace servant. He did not return to his seat. Instead, he stood in front of her and bowed slightly. He looked at her seriously. The distance between the two was very close. Tang Guo also looked straight at him and smiled. Yes. Got it. Jing Cheng's eyes were full of smiles. He raised his hand and pinched Tang Guo's chin. He said in a low voice, "Of course I believe in your Majesty, but the first person to accompany your Majesty out of the palace is not me. I am still very regretful. So, what does Imperial Husband want?" Like this, before Tang Guo could react, her lips were covered by 2 pieces of warmth. She looked at him with a hint of surprise in her eyes. She was not surprised, nor did she panic. On the other hand, the palace servants standing around quickly lowered their heads. They all thought to themselves, "Oh my God, the Imperial Husband is really bold. He actually dared to pinch the Empress's chin and kiss her mouth." The chief steward was shaking like a sieve. So this was the type that His Majesty liked. She was sure that His Majesty was not angry at all. Instead, he liked His Majesty's actions. "Your Majesty, you should close your eyes at this time." Jing Cheng opened his eyes and found that His Majesty was looking at him. His ears turned red. However, he did not intend to let her go just like that. Her Majesty's taste was even sweeter than he had imagined. As he wished, Tang Guo hooked her arms around his neck. "All right, I'll do as you say. I'll close my eyes now. Head Chief, is it too late to leave now?" She really didn't hear anything. Her husband was bold, and Her Majesty really indulged him. There was no doubt that the Imperial Husband was Her Majesty's favorite. System, I'm used to it. Boring, boring. Blocked, blocked. Suddenly, he felt that it was a little lonely to be single. After a long time, Jing Cheng let go of Tang Guo. He even said regretfully, His Majesty will only reach adulthood in a few months. Otherwise, he could do more. Right now, he was very eager to completely possess His Majesty. System, TSK, TSK, TSK. Don't worry, a few months will pass quickly. Tang Guo pushed Jing Cheng away and touched his back. She felt that it was a little wet. Go take a bath first and change your clothes. You'll catch a cold if you stay here for too long. Okay, I'll go now. Wait for me, Your Majesty. The next day, according to the agreement with Su Qing, Tang Guo took Su Qing out of the palace to play after the court was dismissed. Chapter 9:16. Other than the chief steward, Tang Guo brought 4 people with her. These 4 people were all experts among experts. The 2 of them pretended to be ordinary people and rode in a carriage together. Su Qing's eyes changed from the melancholy in the palace to a smile. It seems that you've really been stifled, Tang Guo said with a smile. Su Qing hurriedly said, No, there's Your Majesty in the palace. How could I be stifled? It's only because Your Majesty accompanied Su Qing out of the palace this time that Su Qing was even happier. Then when I'm free in the future, I'll accompany you out to play. How about it? Tang Guo had a faint smile on her lips, and the gentleness in her eyes made Su Qing stunned. He was sure that the Empress was not lying to him. She was really telling him that when she was free in the future, she would bring him out to play. Thinking of today's purpose, he hurriedly dispelled the strange and complicated feeling in his heart. Su Qing can't ask for anything more. It's Su Qing's fortune to be able to get such a promise from Your Majesty. You like the zither, like painting, and you should also like the beautiful scenery outside the palace. In the future, I'll accompany you to travel the world, see the beautiful scenery, and taste the delicious food. How about it? Su Qing was stunned. Of course it's good to have Your Majesty accompany me. How could he travel the world with her, see the beautiful scenery, and taste the delicious food? Look, in just a few months, Her Majesty had forgotten about Nan Yunchuan and was so concerned about him. This was the heart of an emperor. The word love was not worth mentioning to an emperor. He didn't believe that she didn't know about Nan Yunchuan's crazy appearance. She was the Empress, the Emperor of the West Holy Kingdom. If she wanted to know something, wouldn't it be easy? Su Qing thought of this and subconsciously asked, Your Majesty, do you still remember Yunchuan? After asking, he was a little annoyed. Why was it that every time he thought of this, he couldn't help but mention a person who shouldn't be mentioned in front of Her Majesty? He still paid attention to the Empress's expression without blinking. After asking, the smile in the Empress's eyes disappeared. She casually fiddled with her sleeves and asked, Why did you mention him? It's Su Qing who shouldn't have mentioned it. He shouldn't have known the truth behind Nan Yunchuan's death. The Empress had announced that Nan Yunchuan had died of illness, so he had died of illness. Su Qing lowered her eyes and said, When Brother Yunchuan was here, he was on good terms with me. I remember that a few months ago, His Majesty often thought of Brother Yunchuan who was recuperating outside the palace in front of Su Qing. Now, His Majesty treats Su Qing so well, no different from Brother Yunchuan back then. So, you ask this because you want to know whether I care about Yunchuan or you, right? Su Qing saw that the Empress was not angry and admitted, Yes, because I don't want to be Brother Yunchuan's substitute. If Your Majesty treats me like this because of Brother Yunchuan, then Su Qing is guilty. You worry too much. You are you, and Yunchuan is Yunchuan. Su Qing noticed that the Empress in front of her seemed to have lowered her voice. Yunchuan, it's already over. Her soft sigh made Su Qing not know if she should continue this topic. Because he discovered that when the Empress mentioned Nanyun River, her eyes were filled with regret, and not hatred. At this time, he couldn't tell the difference. He remembered that Nan Yunchuan had betrayed the Empress, but the Empress didn't kill him. This was already the greatest tolerance as an emperor. So the question he asked just now was really a bit stupid. Su Qing, I want to hear you play the guqin. Su Qing quickly took out the guqin, looked at the scenery outside the carriage, and played a suitable song. Chapter 9:17. He would occasionally glance at the Empress's expression and found that she was indeed enjoying his zither music. At the same time, he also found that the Empress treated him differently from Nan Yunchuan. She was more appreciative of him or appreciative of his talents. When she was in front of Nan Yunchuan, she would often be amused by Nan Yunchuan's interesting stories, even if it was shallow. Su Qing was stunned. It turned out that Her Majesty did not have any feelings for him. She only admired his talent, or perhaps she had some pity for him. Looking at the harem, the only ones who could talk to Her Majesty were him and Nan Yunchuan. Perhaps, Her Majesty did not have any feelings for Nan Yunchuan, but because they were different. The Empress was willing to get along with them because of their sincerity. She was also willing to give them grace, pamper them, flatter them, trust them, and give them a transcendent status that was different from others. Stop, Su Qing. Your zither music is messed up. Su Qing was shocked. Only then did she realize that he was distracted and made a mistake. She quickly stopped. Your Majesty, please forgive me. Don't forgive me so easily. How can there be such rules when you come out to play? Su Qing quickly smiled. Yes. At this moment, he vaguely understood that the Empress was a lonely person. He and Nan Yunchuan were the most sincere among the people in the harem. This was the reason why the Empress treated them well. The Empress did not have any feelings for them. Nan Yunchuan's betrayal, the Empress's sadness should be disappointment. The person she thought was sincere to her had betrayed her. However, she was not willing to kill Nan Yunchuan and help him. This was for the sake of their old friendship. The Empress, perhaps she really did not pay attention to Nan Yunchuan outside the palace. Su Qing had an indescribable feeling in her heart. It was the sudden stagger of the carriage that woke her up. Your Majesty, what's going on? Su Qing's face was vigilant, but her heart was very calm. The people he had arranged had arrived. Everything that had happened today had been carefully arranged by him. He no longer wanted to continue entangling with the Empress. The Empress could not be moved by him and could treat him very well. While he was scheming against the Empress, he was afraid that because of the Empress's kindness, he would lose his heart. Just like Nan Yunchuan, in the end, he became a crazy person who fiddled with old things all day. Tang Guo looked at the worried Su Qing and comforted her. Don't be afraid, nothing will happen. She lifted the curtain of the carriage and walked out. Su Qing hurriedly followed him out. The current situation was that they were surrounded by masked men in black. The 4 experts brought by Tang Guo were entangled with the men in black. There were only 4 experts, and there were about 20 black-clothed men. The head chief had no choice but to personally go into battle to deal with the assassins. However, with only 5 people against 20 people, there was no way they could stop them. Seeing Tang Guo and Su Qing come out, the men in black looked at each other and raised their swords to attack Tang Guo. In an instant, Tang Guo quickly pulled out her sword and fought with the black-clothed man. Su Qing's background was music, chess, calligraphy, and painting since she was young. She did not know martial arts. At least on the surface, Su Qing could not know martial arts. Therefore, Tang Guo dragged Su Qing while dealing with the assassins. The system looked at Tang Guo's wonderful performance and could not help but praise, "Host, your acting is getting better and better. You can obviously strangle the throat with a sword, but you have to deal with it with difficulty. If I did not know the truth, I would have thought that you would not be able to hold on. Tongzi, you have been too bored recently." Chapter 9:18. Your Majesty, why don't you let me go and let the chief steward and the others cover you? You can escape first. After a quarter of an hour, the experts were also struggling. The chief steward was slightly injured. Fortunately, her martial arts skills were superb and she was careful to not lose her life. The signal had been sent out, but this place was very far from the imperial city. They did not know if the enemy had support. Without support, they would not be able to hold on for long. If there was support, this was simply a dead end. When the chief steward heard Su Qing's words, she quickly said, "Master, young Master Su is right. We will cover you. You go first." The other 4 experts nodded, indicating that they were willing to use their lives in exchange for Tang Guo's departure. Tang Guo grabbed Su Qing's wrist and smiled, "How can I leave you here? If I can't protect you, how can I rule the world?" Su Qing did not expect that the Empress would not give up on him at this time. He was an insignificant member of the harem. According to the Empress's interests, she should immediately abandon him. If she brought those experts, she could still rush out. "Your Majesty, you should let me go." I don't know martial arts and will only drag you down. However, Tangwa did not let go. Instead, she grabbed his wrist and ordered the others, we can't just sit still and wait for death. Rush out. The chief steward and the other 4 experts understood and began to rush out of the encirclement. After everyone's hard work, they finally opened a breakthrough. Tangwa cut the rope pulling the carriage and took Su Qing on the horse. The rest of the people also jumped on the horse and rushed in a certain direction. Su Qing did not expect that the people around the Empress were so powerful. What he did not expect was that the Empress was even more powerful. He thought that these men in black were enough to deal with these people, so he did not arrange a backup plan. If the Empress really escaped, his plan today would be in vain. Therefore, after getting on the horse, he quickly turned around and looked at one of the men in black. He mouthed something. The black man saw Su Qing's mouth and nodded slightly. He quickly caught up and shouted, "Release the arrows." The chief steward's expression immediately changed. "Your Majesty, be careful. They are about to shoot." She and the other 4 people ran behind Tangwa to block the flying arrows. For these experts, dodging the arrows of more than 20 people was not a problem. However, there would occasionally be fish that slipped through the net and flew to Tangwa. Fortunately, Tangwa's skills were not bad. She was able to dodge accurately every time. This time, Su Qing was very anxious. She could not find a chance to help her block the arrow. That's right, he had planned everything today in order to block an arrow for the Empress and completely leave a deep impression in the Empress' heart. In the future, he would no longer need to curry favor with the Empress. In order to make the Empress believe in his sincerity, he naturally had to show some sincerity so that he would not be suspected. To an emperor, life was extremely important. If he was willing to give up his life for her, then she would never be able to forget him for the rest of her life. What he wanted was the Empress's unconditional trust. Then, he could make use of this to carry out his plan. Su Qing had been waiting for an opportunity, and it had indeed come. Seeing that Tangwa had sent another arrow flying from behind, Su Qing looked at the arrow and smiled. She gently wrapped her arms around Tangwa's waist and was about to use her back to block the arrow. Chapter 919. In an instant, he felt his whole body flying. The arrow flew past his face and cut off a strand of his hair. As he flew up, he heard the Empress's voice. "Chief Steward, protect Su Qing." Immediately after, he was received by the head chief on his horse. He subconsciously turned around. Because the Empress had left him here with the head chief, she had no time to take care of him. The arrow was aimed directly at her neck. At that time, Su Qing's heart was raised, but he quickly heaved a sigh of relief because the Empress actually held the arrow, and it was only a finger away from her throat. However, his relief came too quickly. The Empress's horse was shot by an arrow. With a blood-curdling screech, it began to gallop madly. At that time, Su Qing's eyes widened. She saw the horse running straight to the cliff. The Empress didn't have time to react and fell off the cliff. "Your Majesty!" Su Qing shouted. At the same time, there was another Your Majesty in the distance. Immediately after, an imposing man appeared on his horse. The people he brought with him were entangled with the black-clothed assassin. Su Qing's face was pale, and her eyes were lifeless as she looked at the man approaching from afar. He was very familiar with this man. It was the imperial husband. At this moment, his mind was filled with the scene of the Empress grabbing that arrow and falling off the cliff. She didn't have the heart to think deeply about why her husband was here. Jing Cheng rode his horse to the edge of the cliff. There was only a thick fog rising from the edge of the cliff. He couldn't see the bottom at all. He turned around and coldly glanced at Su Qing, then said to the chief steward, "I'll go down and find His Majesty." "Imperial husband, be careful." The chief steward felt bitter in her heart. His Majesty had given her the task of protecting Su Qing. She did not expect that His Majesty would fall off the cliff. Now that the imperial husband was here, she breathed a sigh of relief, but she was also a little worried. After all, she knew that the person Her Majesty cared about the most was her husband. She vaguely felt that something was wrong today. Now that the life or death of His Majesty was unknown, She did not have time to think about this. She could only remind Jing Cheng to be careful and nothing else. In her heart, His Majesty was more important than the imperial husband. Jing Cheng looked cold on the surface, but in fact, he was panicking inside. The moment he saw her fall off the cliff, he felt as if his heart was about to break. He understood that she must have wanted to do something by accompanying Su Qing today. He had never thought that such an accident would happen. Those men in black, he could suspect that Su Qing did it without any reason. If anything happened to His Majesty, he would come back and kill Su Qing. When he urged his horse down the mountain, he even said to the chief steward, "Protect young Master Su well. Don't let him get hurt." Su Qing could feel that the imperial husband was looking at her coldly. He didn't suspect anything. He only thought that the imperial husband was blaming him for coming out to play and causing harm to His Majesty. Now, he also did not know what to do. He only wanted the Empress to remember his sincerity. She wanted to remember that on this day, he was willing to risk his life to save her. He wanted all of her trust. For the time being, he did not have any plans to take her life. If the Empress died at this time, not only would his plan fail, it would also be completely messed up. Of course, the indescribable panic in his heart made him completely forget about his plan. He even thought that if he hadn't made such a plan today, perhaps he would already be enjoying the beautiful scenery with the Empress. Or perhaps, when carrying out the plan, he should have sent someone to investigate the area. How did he know that there would be a cliff here? Jing Cheng arrived at the foot of the cliff with his heart beating fast, looking for that familiar person. He was very afraid. He was afraid that he would see her fall to pieces. Chapter 920. Split up and search. Yes, imperial husband. Jing Cheng calculated where Tangguo might have fallen and walked further and further away. He pushed aside layers of weeds and searched inch by inch, unwilling to let go of even a small pile of grass. He originally thought that falling from such a high place, even if she didn't die, she would be seriously injured. If it wasn't for the fact that he still had to search for her, his mind would probably be blank right now. He only wanted to find her as soon as possible so that her chances of survival would be higher. Unexpectedly, after passing through a small path, he saw a familiar person sitting on a smooth stone slab, unharmed. "Your Majesty." Jing Cheng pulled out his sword and quickly crushed the weeds blocking his way. In the blink of an eye, he rushed in front of Tangguo and hugged her in his arms. "It's good that you're okay." The smile on Jing Cheng's face widened. That feeling of regaining something after losing it was only understood by those who had experienced it. Tangguo could hear his rapid heartbeat. She smiled and said, "I've made you worry. As long as you're okay." No matter what thoughts she had, what plans she had, or what she wanted to do, he didn't care. He only cared about her as a person. She was unharmed, standing in front of him, smiling at him. He was very happy. "Your Majesty, do you want to return to the palace now? It's rare for you to come to the wilderness. There's no need to rush back to the palace." Tangguo said with a smile. "Imperial husband, do you know how to hunt? I usually see you practice swordsmanship, but you've never used it in practice. I want to see you hunt." "Okay, I'll go hunting now. What kind of prey does your Majesty want?" Jing Cheng picked up the sword that had been thrown on the ground. There was still a lot of mud on the sword. Tangguo asked with a smile, "Imperial husband, don't you usually care about this sword the most? Why did you throw it on the ground?" "This sword was given to me by His Majesty. It's very important to me." Jing Cheng's eyes were filled with love. But no matter how important the sword is, it can't compare to His Majesty. Indeed, he treasured this sword very much. He only used this sword to practice martial arts when His Majesty was here. When His Majesty wasn't here, he used something else. He had never thought that he would one day use this sword to cut down weeds, thorns, branches, or even throw it directly to the ground. He loved swords to the point of madness. Before he fell in love with the person in front of him, he thought that the only thing that would accompany him for the rest of his life was the sword. However, after meeting her and having her in his heart, he realized that this was the treasure that he should cherish for the rest of his life. "Your Majesty, what prey do you want?" Jing Cheng asked again. Tang Guo replied, anything is fine as long as it's edible. Then, Your Majesty, please rest for a while. I'll go now. He glanced at the river not far away. Perhaps there are still fish in the water. After I hunt other prey, I will come back to catch fish for Your Majesty. I want to watch you hunt. Tang Guo said, standing up and following Jing Cheng. Jing Cheng quickly turned around and grabbed her hand. Then I'll hold His Majesty's hand. Tang Guo did not refuse. Since he liked to hold her hand, she would follow him. Who asked him to be so cute? She liked this kind of personality. He had a straightforward personality. Once he had decided on something, he would do things according to his heart. In front of her, he would not think that he was inferior to others and would treat her as an equal. It was especially easy to get along with such a person. He was obviously a smart person and knew how to scheme, but when he faced her, she only saw sincerity. When he was jealous, it was especially obvious. He was really cute. Chapter 9:21. Jing Cheng's skills were indeed very good. Tang Guo was unscathed after falling from such a high place. He knew that her martial arts were very good. This was definitely not a matter of luck. Even he could not guarantee that she would be unscathed after falling from such a high place. Such a powerful empress did not need his careful protection at all. But if he did not hold her hand, he could not be at ease. Because he cared about her, he wanted to protect her and not let her suffer the slightest harm. He had no right to stop her from doing certain things. She was the Empress of the West Holy Kingdom and had many things to consider. So, he could only accompany her and stand by her side. He would not betray her and would appear in time when she needed him. Jing Cheng quickly caught his prey. It was a wild boar. He was clearly a handsome person, but he was carrying a large piece of wild boar meat on his shoulder. His other hand did not forget to hold his beloved Empress and lead her back to the stone slab. Looking at the wild boar meat in front of him, Jing Cheng was a bit embarrassed. He had never learned to cook. Help me cut the meat. I'll do the rest. Jing Cheng looked at Tang Guo with some surprise. Your Majesty knows how to roast meat. Yes. Tang Guo said with a smile. Jing Cheng no longer hesitated. According to Tang Guo's instructions, he cut the meat into appropriate sizes. After making a fire, he planned to go to the river to catch fish. He found a slender stick and sharpened the tip. Holding the stick, he stood by the river. His eyes were like torches. With one stab, a living fish would appear. Basically, his arrows did not miss. When he brought back a skewer of fish on the stick, Tang Guo's roasted wild boar meat was already golden yellow and smelled delicious. He stared at the meat on the grill and was a bit surprised. Her Majesty actually knew how to roast meat. Looking at the color and smell, he knew that it would be very delicious. He should be the only one who had seen such an empress. Do you know how to cut the fish open? Yes. Jing Cheng hurriedly got to work. He used the sword that Tang Guo gave him. He did not think that the sword would be wronged this time. It was the sword's blessing to serve Her Majesty. System. This way of thinking is really enlightened. After Jing Cheng dissected the fish and washed it, Tang Guo's wild boar meat was also roasted. She handed a piece to Jing Cheng. Try it. What do you think? System. Actually, he was quite envious of humans at times. For example, the humans in front of him could eat all kinds of delicious food. Jing Cheng took a bite and felt that his mouth was full of fragrance. This piece of wild boar meat was full of color, fragrance, and taste. When he was chewing, he was stunned for a moment. There was clearly no seasoning here, so how could the wild boar be so delicious? He could taste a lot of seasoning. Of course, he was only stunned for a moment. Then, he began to enjoy the delicious food and didn't think too much about it. Tang Guo saw Jing Cheng's confusion, but she didn't explain. She had already said that Jing Cheng was the smartest man in the harem. After eating the wild boar, Tang Guo grilled the fish. At this time, Jing Cheng noticed that there were a few small bottles beside Tang Guo. He guessed that these should be seasonings. He hadn't seen it before, but now it had appeared. He didn't care at all, and his gaze was fixed on the fish. Roasted wild boar meat was delicious, so the fish must be delicious as well. After eating and drinking to her heart's content, Tang Guo lazily lay on Jing Cheng's body. Ah Cheng. Jing Cheng was stunned for a moment when Tang Guo suddenly changed the way she addressed him. He heard Tang Guo continue, "I'll call you Ah Cheng from now on, okay?" Chapter 922. All right. Jing Cheng was full of smiles. He held her face and kissed her lips. "Then can I call your Majesty by his name in the future?" "Of course, you can call me whatever you want." Guo. Jing Cheng called out happily. "In the future, when it's just me and Guo, I'll call you that. As long as you like it." Tang Guo said indulgently. Jing Cheng's smile never disappeared. "What do we do next?" He vaguely sensed that Tang Guo had fallen from such a high place and nothing had happened. It could be seen that she had deliberately fallen off the cliff. There must be some plan. Next, Tang Guo held his arm and touched his cheek. "I won't care about anyone else in the future. I only have Ah Cheng in my eyes." Jing Cheng was puzzled. Tang Guo continued, "The Empress fell off the cliff and was seriously injured. She broke her head and lost her memory. From now on, she only remembers the imperial husband who saved her. In this life, she will only dote on the imperial husband. What do you think?" Good, of course, it was good. It was simply too good. He had been waiting for this day for a long time. Although she usually doted on many people in the palace, he was the only one she liked. But they were still in the dark. Of course, he was happy to be able to stand together openly. All right. He was already prepared to be suppressed by many people in the future. However, His Majesty promised to only like him. If he was the only one who owned her, he was willing to accept anyone's provocation. He would never take a step back. No matter how great the pressure was, he could withstand it. The two of them stayed for half a day. Then, Jing Cheng carried his beloved His Majesty out of the place. He gathered his people and said that His Majesty was seriously injured and had to return to the palace for treatment immediately. Su Qing had been waiting on the cliff. When she saw Jing Cheng carrying Tang Guo back, she stood up and was about to rush in front of Jing Cheng. Jing Cheng said, "Stop him." "Yes, Imperial husband." Su Qing hurriedly said, "How is His Majesty?" Jing Cheng glanced at him coldly. "I don't have time to talk nonsense with you. I'm taking His Majesty back to the palace for treatment now." Lying on Jing Cheng's broad back, Tang Guo, who was wrapped in clothes, fell asleep comfortably. This person's aura made her feel more comfortable. At least, in this world, she was very satisfied. So be it. She would like him for the rest of her life and only treat him well. She closed her eyes and curled her lips. Su Qing watched Jing Cheng leave in a hurry with Tang Guo and quickly followed. Although he couldn't see Tang Guo's situation up close, he still didn't give up. He followed her all the way back to the palace. He was stopped outside Tang Guo's bedroom, but he didn't intend to leave. "His Majesty will definitely be fine. Master Su, you should go back and rest first. Eat some food and then come back to see His Majesty. If there is any news, I will report it to you immediately." "No, I want to wait for His Majesty to wake up." He was very flustered. His Majesty did not move at all along the way. It could be seen that her injuries were not light. She did not know how high the cliff was. It was fortunate that she was still alive. How was he feeling right now? Regret. He didn't want to admit it, but he had to admit that he really regretted it. If he hadn't planned everything today, Her Majesty wouldn't have fallen off the cliff. If she hadn't fallen off the cliff, she wouldn't have suffered such serious injuries. If something really happened to her, what should he do? Su Qing stood in front of the door in a daze. Her mind was filled with the picture of their interactions. At this moment, the door of the Empress's bedroom was opened. Chapter 923. When the head steward walked out, Su Qing hurriedly walked up and asked anxiously, "Head steward, how is His Majesty?" The imperial husband did not allow him to enter, and the others also thought that it was inappropriate for him to enter. They thought that it was because of him that His Majesty was injured, and it was indeed because of him that His Majesty was injured. His Majesty's injuries are very serious, and he is currently out of danger. As for when he will wake up, the imperial physician has not given a definite message. Young Master Su, you should go back first. His Majesty will not wake up for a while, so it's useless to wait here. I'll wait a little longer. Su Qing's heart sank, and a bitter smile appeared on her face. Perhaps she would wake up soon. When she was in danger, she asked the head steward to protect her. If she woke up and asked about him, she would definitely be anxious if he was not there. So, he should just wait here. The head steward looked at Su Qing's dazed expression and thought of the scene he saw inside. He suddenly felt like he had been fucked. However, when she thought of what His Majesty had told her about Su Qing's actions, she could only sigh. What else could she say? She deserved it. Although His Majesty did not necessarily fall in love with Su Qing, he really doted on her. If he did not have second thoughts, he would definitely be extremely honored in this lifetime. His Majesty's actions were also bitterly disappointed by Su Qing, Nan Yunchuan, and the others. On the other hand, the imperial husband usually did not appear in front of His Majesty, nor did he know how to sweet talk. However, the moment something happened to His Majesty, she saw fear in his eyes. He was obviously extremely afraid, but he still ordered everything with a cold face and personally went down to find her. As for Su Qing, she said that she was worried about His Majesty, but she only waited on the cliff. It could be seen that in her heart, His Majesty was not that important. Then young Master Su, remember to go back later. His Majesty would not wake up today. His Majesty had instructed that she would wake up in 3 days. The corner of the head steward's eyes twitched, and he hurriedly went in. She did not dare to expose herself. If she ruined His Majesty's plans, she would not be able to bear the consequences. Su Qing stood outside the bedroom for several hours. Until the sun set, there was still no news of the Empress waking up. The setting sun's light fell on him. He raised his head and looked at the closed door. He said to the servant guarding the door, "Go in and inform His Majesty. I want to see His Majesty." The palace servant hurriedly went in and came out after a while, shaking his head. "Young Master Su, the imperial husband doesn't allow it. You've been standing for a whole day, so it's better if you go back to your quarters and eat some food, in case your body can't take it anymore." There was only disappointment and worry in Su Qing's eyes. "Got it. I'll go back first. If His Majesty wakes up, remember to come and inform me." Su Qing left in a daze, with a bitter smile on her cold face. After returning to the palace, he ate a simple meal. No matter how delicious the food was, it was tasteless at this moment. His mind was filled with the time he spent with the Empress, as well as that place on the cliff. She had pushed him to the head chief's side, caught the arrow with one hand, and did not forget to instruct the head chief to take care of him. Even if she didn't have any romantic feelings for him, this love was really precious. Perhaps he understood Nan Yunchuan's feelings. Who could resist being treated with such sincerity? No matter how hard Su Qing's heart was, she couldn't help but be moved. If His Majesty had not fallen off the cliff and he had not experienced that kind of sudden loss, perhaps he would not have such a deep impression and would not be so panicked. The next day, Su Qing went to the Empress's bedroom again and was told that the Empress had not woken up. "Do you mean that your Majesty doesn't recognize me and doesn't remember me?" Su Qing's expression completely collapsed. After waiting for 3 days, this was the result. How could she accept it? He had just thought it through and tried to persuade himself not to hurt her even if he had to realize his dream. However, she actually lost her memory and forgot about him. "Since I don't remember you, you can leave first." Such an indifferent and cold His Majesty made Su Qing feel very unfamiliar, and there was an indescribable sadness in her heart. Looking at her unfamiliar appearance, he seemed to have gone somewhere. His heart seemed to be empty. His Majesty had forgotten about him. She actually didn't remember him. "Su Qing, you can leave first," Jing Cheng said impatiently. Su Qing looked at Tang Guo, but Tang Guo did not give her a look. Chapter 925. Su Qing walked out of the Empress's palace in a daze. She did not return to his palace. Instead, she stood at the entrance of the palace with a dull look in her eyes. He had already thought about it. When the Empress woke up, he would no longer try to please her with schemes. If he wanted to overthrow the Empress's rule, he could think of other ways. But he really did not expect that because of this fall, the Empress would break her head and lose a part of her memory. Those unfamiliar eyes. He had never seen them on the Empress's face. At that time, she was so close to him. The way she looked at him made him feel that the distance between them was so far away. Chief Steward. Su Qing saw that the Chief Steward was about to enter and quickly stopped him. The Chief Steward turned around and asked, "May I ask if young Master Su has any orders? I just want to ask if the Imperial Physician has said when Her Majesty will recover her memory." Su Qing asked expectantly, "And, is there any way to help Her Majesty recover as soon as possible?" The Chief Steward shook his head. "No, the Imperial Physician did not say this. He only said that Her Majesty's body was weak. As for the lost memories, he could not find them. At present, Her Majesty is still confirming how many memories she has lost. But now, it seems that Her Majesty has forgotten many people. There is still no problem in dealing with court affairs. Then does Her Majesty remember Imperial Husband?" The Chief Steward nodded. "Her Majesty remembers Imperial Husband." This servant heard from Imperial Husband that when he found Her Majesty, she was seriously injured. But at that time, she opened her eyes and looked at Imperial Husband. It should be this glance that made Her Majesty remember Imperial Husband. Then how many people does Her Majesty remember? Su Qing continued to ask, "Why did Her Majesty forget me?" This servant has no way to answer. As for how many people Her Majesty remembers, we can only let Her Majesty meet all the people she is familiar with. Su Qing sighed, "Then I'll wait here." "Will Her Majesty meet many people later?" "Yes." "Young Master Su, why don't you go back and wait first? This servant will inform you when there is news." "No, I'll wait here," Su Qing said very stubbornly. She wanted to wait for a result. He also wanted to know when Her Majesty would remember. He would personally ask the Imperial Physician in a while. On this day, Su Qing watched as one person after another entered the Empress's palace. Every time someone came out, he would ask, "Her Majesty remembers you?" "His Majesty doesn't remember me." Receiving such an answer, he felt a little relieved. So His Majesty did not forget him alone. Knowing this result, he felt a little better. "Does His Majesty remember you?" Su Qing looked at the person who came out and couldn't help but ask. When the person who came out saw this, he quickly shook his head, indicating that he didn't remember. There were only a few dozen people in the harem, and it didn't take long for them to finish. Su Qing asked everyone who came out, and the result was that His Majesty couldn't accept them. Now, he was not so nervous. Her Majesty remembered the Imperial Husband. It was probably because he appeared by the Imperial Husband's side at the last moment that left a deep impression on him. It wasn't that Her Majesty treated His Royal Highness differently. After meeting the people in the Imperial harem, Tangwa didn't plan to summon the courtiers. When the courtiers came to the Imperial Court on another day, she would take a look at them. "Your Majesty, young Master Su is still waiting outside." The Chief Steward had no choice but to speak up. Actually, she did not want to speak up. Tangwa asked, "Do you know why he's still waiting outside?" Young Master Su should be waiting for the Imperial Physician to ask about His Majesty's condition. Chapter 926. Then, Imperial Dr. Shu, you can go out. The Imperial Doctor didn't know the truth about Tangwa pretending to have amnesia. He really thought that she had amnesia. The only one who knew about this, besides her, was the Chief Steward, Jing Cheng. The Imperial Doctor only thought that she really broke her head. At present, he was frowning and preparing to help her recover her memory. Yes, this official will take his leave. Imperial Dr. Shu went out with his medicine box. As soon as he stepped out of the door of the palace, he was stopped by Su Qing. He bowed to Su Qing, "Young Master Su." Imperial Dr. Shu, Su Qing looked anxious and asked in a low voice, "How is His Majesty's condition?" "His Majesty's injuries are recovering quickly, but," Imperial Dr. Shu shook his head and pointed to his head, "we can't see anything about the missing part of his memory. When will he recover?" "This should be the accumulation of blood in the head. It may be recovered after a while, or it may not be recovered for a lifetime." Imperial Dr. Shu said with some relief, "Fortunately, His Majesty just doesn't remember many people, and other memories are not missing. Otherwise, the West Holy Country would be in chaos." After Su Qing heard this, she couldn't believe it. She grabbed Imperial Dr. Shu and asked, "Then have you come up with any countermeasures?" Imperial Dr. Shu quickly shook his head, "Young Master Su, don't be excited. We also want to help His Majesty recover his memory, but this injury is in the head. At present, there is no specific way. We still need to go back and study it." "Then, Imperial Dr. Shu, you should go back and study it." Su Qing let go of him with an apologetic face, "Sorry for the offense." Imperial Dr. Shu shook his head and left with Su Qing. He carried his medicine box and rushed to the Imperial Hospital. He really had to go back and think about countermeasures. Even if those memories were not very important, it was still related to His Majesty. They must come up with countermeasures. Su Qing stood in the same place and was still unwilling to leave. Seeing this, the chief steward said, "Young Master Su, His Majesty is tired today. You should go back." "I'll go back after a while." Su Qing had a bitter smile on her face until the sun went down and the sky darkened. She looked at the closed bedroom and sighed. When he saw the chief steward come out again, he asked, "Has the imperial husband not left yet?" "His Majesty has ordered that imperial husband will rest here today." After the chief steward said this, Su Qing's face turned pale. He clenched his fists and said, "Then I'll come back tomorrow." He looked back at the bedchamber and finally left. Under the empty robe was a thin and weak body, and inside the body was an empty heart. He did not even know when he had lost his heart. He even thought that he had succeeded in scheming against Her Majesty. Could this be the retribution of not knowing how to cherish a loss? He somewhat understood Brother Yunchuan's crazy appearance. Only when he really lost that person could he experience that kind of feeling. The next day, Su Qing arrived outside the Empress's palace at dawn. The head chief came out and transformed. "Young Master Su, why are you so early?" I want to see Her Majesty. How is she?" "His Majesty just woke up. His complexion looks good." The chief steward complained in his heart. "Not only is he not bad, his complexion is clearly rosy and he's in great shape." Su Qing said, "Then can you report to His Majesty that Su Qing is here to see him?" "Then young Master Su, please wait a moment. This servant will ask His Majesty." Su Qing smiled bitterly and waited at the side. If it was before, the chief steward would have directly led him in. There was no need to report. Chapter 927. Su Qing's heart pounded as she followed the chief steward into the Empress's chamber. He had never asked to appear in front of her like this, just to see her and see if she was well. He was crazy. He thought he was crazy, even crazier than Nan Yunchuan. When he walked in, he saw the Empress leaning against the bed. Sitting beside her was the handsome and extraordinary imperial husband. He was holding a bowl in his hand and carefully feeding the Empress food. The movements of the two were incomparably compatible. At that moment, Su Qing was a little absent-minded. He even thought that if he had gone down to find Her Majesty before, would Her Majesty still remember him now? The person sitting beside her and accompanying her should be him. He hurriedly expelled these messy things from his mind and bowed to Tang Guo. "Su Qing greets Your Majesty. Get up." Tang Guo raised her arm, and Jing Cheng carefully helped her wipe the corner of her mouth. Such a natural action made Su Qing's eyes sour, and jealousy grew in her heart. At this moment, she really wanted to push that man away and let him do it. "My chief steward said that you wanted to see me. What's the matter?" Her indifferent and unfamiliar tone was like the first time they met. Su Qing was stunned. In fact, she was much colder than the first time they met. "It's Su Qing who wants to see Your Majesty." I'm worried about your Majesty's safety. I'm fine. You're considerate. If there's nothing else, you can go back. Your Majesty. Tangwa raised her eyes and asked, What, is there anything else? Su Qing looked at this pair of unfamiliar eyes and didn't know what to say. Her heart was sour. What should he say? He could say anything. Was he going to ask why she had forgotten him? She had forgotten so many people, and he was just one of them. No, no. Then Su Qing will come to visit your Majesty tomorrow. Tangwa did not refuse. She nodded and did not look at Su Qing. Instead, a smile suddenly appeared in her eyes. It was not for Su Qing, but for the imperial husband in front of her. Give me a little more. I'm not full yet. Su Qing's heart turned cold. For a long time, she was unable to move her feet. She could only watch as the imperial husband fed her, and she seemed to be enjoying it. Occasionally, there would be some at the corner of her mouth. She would lift her chin and let her husband wipe it off for her. He had never seen His Majesty like this. If His Majesty had not fallen off the cliff, she would not have forgotten him. If he had not arranged everything, His Majesty would not have fallen off the cliff. Therefore, all of these consequences were caused by himself. Su Qing watched the interaction between the two of them. Finally, she dragged her heavy footsteps and walked out of the palace step by step. She paused several times in the middle. He turned around and saw Her Majesty eating. She didn't even look at him. Was I very familiar with Lord Su in the past? Just as he was about to walk out, he suddenly heard these words and couldn't help but stop. Jing Cheng replied, His Majesty used to dote on him the most. Really? Then why don't I have any impression of it? His Majesty will remember in the future. His eyes were full of smiles. Tangwa could tell that he didn't mean what he said. She smiled and said, It doesn't matter whether you remember it or not. Could it be that your Majesty doesn't want to remember everything from the past? Su Qing did not move. He wanted to know the answer. Could it be that if I want to remember, it can remember? She added, Whether I remember it or not, the imperial husband left the deepest impression on me. I can't forget it no matter what. Su Qing's face was pale, and she finally staggered away. Chapter 928. Young Master Su's face is pale. He doesn't look too good. The head steward reported what he saw to Tangwa. He secretly glanced at her empress, who was enjoying the fruit fed by the imperial husband. Her back was covered in cold sweat. Especially when the imperial husband glanced at her indifferently, she was so scared that her soul almost left her. You don't have to report these things in the future. Yes, Your Majesty. The head steward hurriedly replied. When she left, she couldn't help but wipe the sweat off her face. She couldn't guess His Majesty's thoughts. And this imperial husband was the one who hid his strength. He was actually able to receive special treatment from His Majesty. Ah Cheng, you were so fierce just now that you scared the head steward. Tangwa teased. She was so scared that she was sweating profusely. Her back is probably drenched. Your Majesty's expression just now also scared the head steward. The two of them looked at each other and finally smiled. It was Jing Cheng who said, Su Qing, what do you plan to do with Guo? It wasn't that he wanted to target Su Qing, but that Su Qing had ulterior motives. If it wasn't for his Guo's intelligence, he would have fallen into her trap. What do you want to do with him? Tangwa asked back. I'll listen to Your Majesty. Guo doesn't want to kill him, so I'll chase him out of the palace. It's too dangerous for such a person to stay by your side. He didn't care about Su Qing, but he was afraid that he would harm Guo. In that case, I'll find an opportunity to send all the men out. Jing Cheng's eyes lit up. Tangwa continued, You're the only one left. That sincere gaze made Jing Cheng's entire body heat up. He subconsciously hugged her. And Xiao Jin. He wants to use the power of the West Saint Empire to help him take back the throne of the Qi Kingdom. Moon King doesn't seem to be simple. I've observed for a while. She doesn't seem to have any disloyal thoughts towards Guo. I can use her to deal with Xiao Jin. Jing Cheng's face was full of calculation. The rest is nothing to worry about. I really didn't expect Ah Cheng to understand the situation so well. Jing Cheng's ears were a little red. That's because Guo is in this vortex. I want to protect you. Got it. I understand your intentions. Tang Guo didn't mind Jing Cheng investigating this. Jing Cheng could tell her this frankly because he believed that she wouldn't mind. So, what an adorable person she was. As usual, Su Qing went to see Tang Guo every day, but what she saw every day was the loving scene between Tang Guo and Jing Cheng. Under his witness, Her Majesty the Empress and the imperial husband's relationship grew deeper and deeper. Looking at them every day would make his eyes hurt. That was until the Empress announced that she was disbanding the harem. She also said that she was still underage and that everyone in the harem was innocent. If he was willing to find someone else to marry, she was willing to grant him a marriage and give him a generous dowry. If they were unwilling, she would specially buy a house in the imperial city for them. Whether they would marry or remain single in the future, it would be up to them. After this decree was issued, not only was there a commotion in the harem, even the imperial court was in an uproar. They all submitted memorials to the Empress, asking her to retract her decree. But Tang Guo's attitude was very tough. No matter what problems they posed, she would easily solve them. Later, they found that their weaknesses were still caught by the Empress. In the end, they had no choice but to compromise and no longer dared to oppose the Empress's disbanding of the harem. Many men in the harem found that they couldn't persuade the Empress and agreed to leave the palace. Compared to wasting time in the palace, it was better to go out and live a comfortable life. Chapter 929. The day after Tang Guo gave the decree, 40% of the members of the harem expressed their willingness to leave. Because of their tactfulness, Tang Guo gave them rich rewards and had the chief steward buy individual courtyards for them in the imperial city. How they lived in the future would be up to them. They could choose what kind of life they wanted. With the things the Empress bestowed, as long as they weren't extravagant people and were a bit smart, they wouldn't have to worry about food and clothing. If you have someone you like in the future, you can enter the palace. Jin will sanction marriage for you. These people didn't expect the Empress to be so nice. Not only did he give them freedom, but he also wanted to make the decision for their future marriage. The Empress sanctioning marriage was much better than casually marrying someone. And with the Empress's words, even if they didn't marry for the rest of their lives, no one would dare to do anything to them. If anyone dares to make things difficult for you, you can also enter the palace. Jing Cheng didn't want to fall behind. Just come find me. He understood that these men were sent into the palace mostly because officials wanted to stabilize their relationship with the Empress. After leaving the palace, it was inevitable that they would encounter all kinds of disdain from their families. In West Saint Empire, not all families were like the Jing family where men could grow up peacefully and happily without being discriminated against. Thank you, Your Majesty. Thank you, Imperial Husband. With the two's words, they were truly reassured. At first, they weren't very willing, but the Empress had decreed. They were all smart people and deduced that the Empress couldn't change it, so they decisively made the decision to leave the palace. They didn't expect that there would be nothing to worry about now. To be able to live a prosperous life without being controlled by others, with Her Majesty the Empress and Imperial Husband supporting them, to be able to live freely and happily, this was a life that many people couldn't even dream of. It was much better than being imprisoned in the palace. In the end, they were still men and always yearned for freedom. They weren't willing to live in a small harem. If it wasn't for the fact that they didn't have a choice, there were many among them who had the same hobby as Jing Cheng. After they left, Jing Cheng looked at Tang Guo. Guo won't blame me for acting on my own, right? How could she blame you? You're more thoughtful than me. When these people leave the palace, they will inevitably encounter all kinds of problems. If their mother's family really makes things difficult for them, we should help. A smile appeared on Jing Cheng's face. I have Guo, so I'm willing to help them. They've made a good start. I'm sure that from tomorrow onwards, even more people will leave. Indeed, we should stay here properly. She only had 20 years left in this world. She didn't have much time to do other interesting things. The West Saint Empire's territory was very stable. She only needed to protect it well and hand it over to the next empress. Sure enough, many people came to see Tangguo the next day and said goodbye to her. To these tactful people, Tangguo was very generous. She rewarded them with houses and shops, ensuring that they would not have to worry about food and clothing for the rest of their lives. In 5 days, the harem, which originally had dozens of people, was almost empty. The only ones left were Jing Cheng, the imperial husband, and Su Qing. Jing Cheng naturally would not leave, and Su Qing's existence had attracted the attention of many people. After all, before the empress lost her memory, Su Qing was the most favored one. Now that Su Qing had no intention of leaving, many people were also watching. Would he be the exception? Young Master Su, the other maids of the imperial harem have all left. The servant said carefully. Some of the things that Su Qing did had really offended her. She actually let him go and even gave him a house and a shop to ensure his future life. Isn't His Majesty being too merciful? System, you're thinking too much. I've never seen the host show any mercy before. What she did was a different form of revenge. She chased someone out of the palace and wanted them to think about her for the rest of their lives. They wouldn't be able to live in peace. Young Master Su, you should pack up and leave the palace. The chief conduit said, you know His Majesty's temperament. He means what he says. Since he has already given the order, he can't take it back. Got it. Su Qing's cold voice sounded. I want to stay for a few more days. After a few days, I will go to His Majesty to resign. Oh, okay. The chief steward heaved a sigh of relief and said, then this servant will take his leave first. Take care, Chief Steward. When I leave, I will definitely go and say goodbye to His Majesty. Chapter 931. After the chief steward left, the palace servant asked again, Young Master Su, when are you leaving? This servant can pack your luggage for you. You can do as you see fit. With that, Su Qing walked out, and her voice reached the ears of the palace servant at the same time. There's no need to follow me, I want to see this place again. He didn't spend much time with Her Majesty. Nan Yunchuan entered the palace with him. When they first entered the palace, the two of them felt like old friends at first sight and called each other brothers. Later, when they talked, they vaguely revealed the same thoughts and ambitions. At that time, they got closer and closer, and finally reached a consensus that they must overthrow the Empress's rule and restore the status of men. This matter was confirmed because they inadvertently met Xiao Jin. Xiao Jin was also a pitiful person. He failed in the struggle and was sent to the West Holy Empire as a hostage. A hostage from a neighboring country with great ambitions, of course, it was very good to cooperate with them. Calculating the time, it had only been a little more than a year since they had tried to please Her Majesty. In fact, the closest he had been to the Empress was more than half a year. It was more than half a year after Nan Yunchuan's accident. If it wasn't for this half a year, perhaps he wouldn't have been tempted by the Empress. Some people can only be watched from afar. Once they are close, it is easy to be fascinated. Once they are fascinated, they will not be able to get out and will forget what they want to do. Host, do you think Su Qing will leave the palace? The system asked when it didn't understand. It was very eager to learn. Tangguo replied, yes. Really? I see that he seems to be very unwilling. He should be different from Nan Yunchuan. His reaction now is that he looks a lot more lonely and not crazy. Naturally, if he was the same as Nan Yunchuan, he would have ended up like Nan Yunchuan long ago. The system trembled. This dog host was really merciless when it came to revenge. However, it was only right. The host had given him a chance, but he still wanted to carry out his plan. Then, he couldn't blame the host. Then, after he leaves the palace, would he really be willing? Dear host, can you please explain what else Su Qing could have done? I have a feeling that he won't be satisfied just like that. The system thought for a moment and said, with the host here, there's probably no chance for me to reach into the palace. There's also no chance for me to instigate the ministers of the West Saint nation to rebel. There's basically no chance of success for me to incite the men of the West Saint nation to rebel. Although he didn't know much, the single host had disbanded the harem and even bestowed those people with houses and shops. This was clearly the Empress's compensation to those people. Thinking about it deeply, wasn't this showing the benevolence of Her Majesty the Empress? She wasn't harsh towards men. With such a capable, wise, and benevolent Empress, their days would only become more and more stable. No one was willing to take a big risk to follow Su Qing and do something that they were not sure of. Furthermore, with the host's actions, there was a saying that subordinates follow the example of their superiors. Once everyone in the world knew of the great host's infatuation with the imperial husband, it would become a beautiful story, and many people would follow suit. The higher the status of the imperial husband, the higher the status of all the men in the West Saint nation. Tongzi, you are getting smarter and smarter. When Tangwa heard these thoughts, she said, I don't know what Su Qing will do. I only know that he probably won't stay in the courtyard and live peacefully. Help me keep an eye on him. As long as he doesn't cause trouble in the West Saint nation, you don't have to care. Chapter 933. When Tangwa heard this, she pinched his face and leaned closer. So, Cheng, what do you want to express? Of course, I want to be a real husband and wife with Guo. I've been waiting for this day for a long time. Jing Cheng expressed his thoughts very straightforwardly. Now, I'm the only one in Guo's harem. Tangwa's eyes curved into a smile. Isn't that still 2 months? Cheng, don't worry, be patient. She patted Jing Cheng's face, pushed him away, and tugged at her dress that was wrinkled by Jing Cheng. I still have memorials to approve. Cheng, you can practice your sword by yourself. Jing Cheng was speechless. He could only look on helplessly as his proud empress left. He stood where he was and sighed. Imperial husband, do you want to practice your sword? This servant will get it for you. The palace servant quickly asked. Jing Cheng glanced at him indifferently. No. Guo was not here, so he should forget about practicing his sword. Who was he practicing for? The heir. Without Guo, he had no interest in practicing his sword at all. After Su Qing left the palace, she lived in that house for several days. He was not willing to accept the status quo. He said that he would not deal with the Empress again, but he changed his mind now. He wanted the Empress. Now, his dreams were full of the Empress. When he closed his eyes, the person he thought of was still her. He seemed to be unable to forget her. He was not Nan Yunchuan, who could hold a pile of objects and immerse himself in them all day long and be a crazy person. If he wanted something, he would work hard to get it, even if it was unscrupulous. The Empress was high and mighty. She was the Empress of the West Holy Kingdom. Now, if he wanted to get her, he could only have more strength than her. First, he thought of using Tang Nuoyu. He remembered that some time ago, that stupid woman seemed to be interested in him. So he found an opportunity to meet Tang Nuoyu by chance to attract her attention. According to his calculations, as long as he and that woman were alone for a while, the other party would definitely trust him wholeheartedly. However, he never thought that Tang Nuoyu would be so polite to him. They had indeed met, but what happened was different from what he had imagined. Young Master Su, please be careful. I don't dare to do anything that offends the Empress. I hope that young Master Su will be more careful and not cause any misunderstandings. After what happened last time, Tang Nuoyu had decided not to be entangled with any man related to the Empress. Because she wasn't sure how much the Empress could tolerate her. Nan Yunchuan's appearance, she thought it was the Empress' magnanimity. Even if this Su Qing was no longer related to the Empress, she was still unwilling to take the risk. So be it. She had a few enemies from her previous life in her residence. It was enough for her to play with. This Su Qing was the best at scheming. She really might not be her opponent, so she did not plan to get involved with Su Qing. Young Master Su, if you really want to find someone else, you can actually ask Her Majesty the Empress for help. This prince is just a silk pants, I can't help you. Seeing Su Qing's gloomy face, Tang Nuoyu laughed crazily in her heart. On the surface, she said calmly, Young Master Su, I will leave first. After that, Su Qing created some coincidental encounters. Tang Nuoyu looked at him and ran away. In the end, Tang Nuoyu didn't leave the residence all day, so he couldn't do anything. He wanted to find Xiao Jin, but Xiao Jin didn't have the chance to meet him because of Tang Nuoyu. He thought that things had come to a dead end. He didn't expect that one day, he would receive a message from Xiao Jin asking to meet him. Brother Su, how about this? I'll hand over my influence in the state of Qi to you. I just don't know if you're willing to go and take a gamble. He wasn't willing to do so at first. After all, the state of Qi was his last trump card. But now, it was no longer possible to use the West Saint country as a breakthrough point. Su Qing was a smart person and should understand what he meant. It's not so easy to do anything now. I have a lot of influence in the state of Qi, but to do what we want to do, it's not something that can be done overnight. Brother Su, if you're confident and willing to take a gamble, I'll hand it over to you. Su Qing was waiting for these words. I came to you because I want to continue. Chapter 935. Brother Xiao, I never thought of giving up. Xiao Jin breathed a sigh of relief and smiled. Good, Brother Su, I really didn't misjudge you. You are the one who will do great things. Xiao Jin took out a jade token and pushed it to Su Qing. Take this jade token to the Qi Kingdom and meet those people according to what I said. When the time comes, I will write a letter to you. Show this letter to them and they will naturally listen to you. Brother Su, the rest is up to you. I will pay attention to the news from the West Saint Empire and inform you of the situation here at any time. Xiao Jin didn't want to do this, but he had no other choice. His competitors must know that he still had power in his hands, so they plotted against him to become a hostage of the West Saint Empire. Therefore, it was impossible for him to be taken back. Even if the Empress of the West Saint Empire was willing to let him go, those people from the Qi Kingdom would kill him halfway and would never allow him to take a step into the Qi Kingdom. Su Qing was different. Now that Su Qing was free, she could go wherever she wanted and no one could control her. Who would have thought that a man from the West Saint Empire would go to the Qi Kingdom to do great things? Su Qing took the jade token. Okay, I won't let you down. I will overthrow the West Saint Empire. Yes, he still wanted to overthrow the West Saint Empire. In the past, the reason was to restore the status of men, but now he wanted to get the Empress. If he was a commoner, he wouldn't be able to get her. What if the high and mighty Empress became the ruler of a fallen country? He would personally overthrow her country and imprison her by his side. She could only rely on him in the future and would only belong to him. Su Qing had a faint smile on her face. Thinking of such a scene, the smile in her eyes deepened. Xiao Jin didn't suspect anything and only said, I will have someone give you the letter tomorrow. I have to go back now. This matter can't arouse suspicion. Okay. Su Qing replied and watched Xiao Jin's back as he quickly left. She faintly put away the jade token. The next day, Su Qing received Xiao Jin's letter. On the third day, he went to see Nan Yunchuan. Brother Yunchuan, I'm leaving. Nan Yunchuan, who was wiping the chessboard, paused for a moment before continuing to wipe it. He asked, Where are you going? He was suddenly stunned. You're not staying in the palace? Looks like you don't know. Su faintly smiled. The Empress has already dissolved the harem, leaving only the imperial husband. Nan Yunchuan stopped moving and looked at him in confusion, as if asking why. It's all my fault. Su Qing sat at the side dejectedly, her tone cold. I did something that caused the Empress to lose her memory. She doesn't remember us anymore. She only remembers the imperial husband who saved her in the end. She has deep feelings for him and disbanded the harem for him. Are you jealous, Brother Yunchuan? Nan Yunchuan looked at Su Qing's bleak smile and stopped his action of beating her up. He said, "You're envious too, aren't you? You're regretting it, Su Qing. You're regretting hurting her, right? Ha 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 ha, Su Qing, you're the same as me. You regret it too. Serves her right, serves her right. Those who hurt her should be chased out." With that, he squatted on the ground and continued to wipe the items that had been wiped many times. "Yes, I regret it." Su Qing sighed. "If I had known that she would live in my heart, I wouldn't have chosen that way. But, Brother Yunchuan, we're different." Chapter 936. What's different? Nan Yunchuan did not raise his head. He thought it was all the same. They had all hurt her before they realized that they had fallen in love with her. It was too late to regret. They had all lost her completely. Of course it's different. A faint smile appeared on Su Qing's face. After you lost her, you gave up. You were only willing to hide in this small courtyard and think of her. And I. What about you? Su Qing whispered, her tone filled with infinite affection. I didn't give up. As long as I, Su Qing, am still alive, I will not give up. I am not a member of her harem. I can still have other identities. One day, I will get her. Nan Yunchuan raised his head again. He was not surprised by Su Qing's answer. This was Su Qing's character, the person he was familiar with. What are you going to do? You haven't given up on overthrowing the West Saint Empire, have you? Su Qing's eyes showed admiration. Yes, as expected of Brother Yunchuan who knows me the best. I really haven't given up. Then what are you going to do? Nan Yunchuan asked. Continue to overthrow the West Saint Empire and hurt her? No, how could I hurt her? Su Qing's tone was a little anxious. I overthrew the West Saint Empire. She relied on the West Saint Empire. Now that the West Saint Empire is gone, she can only rely on me. I can have her. Brother Yunchuan, do you understand? In this world, you still have to have absolute power to get what you want. When Nan Yunchuan heard this, he heaved a sigh of relief. How many years will that take? With your current status, it's basically impossible unless you rely on external forces. He added, Tang Nuoyu is no longer feasible. I know, I never thought of using Tang Nuoyu again. That woman is too stupid and too timid. Su Qing sighed. Brother Yunchuan, I'm here to say goodbye to you. I'm leaving. And I want to ask you if you want to go with me. But if you want to go with me, you have to promise me one condition. What condition? If we succeed, you can choose anything, but you are not allowed to snatch her from me. She can only be mine. Ha ha ha. Nan Yunchuan laughed and continued to stroke the white jade chessboard. He shook his head. No, I won't leave. Brother Su, I wish you success. If I want to leave, I want to do what you want to do. I will raise the same conditions as you. A mountain cannot have two tigers. I think it's better for me to stay here. Also, the place you're going to must be very far away. How many years will it take for you to see her? In the Imperial City, I don't need to rush about. Even if I can't see her, I can, as you said, look at things and think of her. I'm the one who made a mistake. Actually, this is good. Forget it. I knew you would make this choice. Su Qing did not try to persuade him anymore. He was only here to bid farewell. If Nan Yunchuan was really willing to go with him, it meant that Nan Yunchuan also wanted to compete with him. Chapter 937. On the fourth day, Su Qing began to live in the house bought by the Empress. She did not take a step out of the door and declared that she was sick. In fact, after seeing Nan Yunchuan, he took his people and left the imperial city in disguise. Taking the letter and keepsake given to him by Xiao Jin, he went to the distant Qi kingdom. He wanted to create a new world there. When he returned to the West Saint country, it would be the day he had her. Through the system, Tang Guo saw Su Qing leaving and him sitting in the carriage with a pair of determined eyes. She laughed out loud. "Ari, great host, what are you laughing at? It's good that people have dreams." "Ian, I won't laugh anymore." Tang Guo put away her smile and supported her chin with her hand. "I'm very curious, how many years will it take for him to return to the West Saint country, and what methods will he use to climb up these years? Even with Xiao Jin's remaining power, it will not be easy to create a new world. 5 years is basically impossible. 10 years, 20 years, or 30 years. I don't know about that either. Who can predict this kind of thing? I only know that as long as Great Host exists, he will not be able to overthrow the rule of the West Saint country. I will only exist here for 20 years. After 20 years, if Su Qing can really create a new world in the Qi Kingdom, the West Saint country will indeed be in danger." The system hesitated. If that was the case, it was true. So, its Great Host must have a way. But if the host did not say, it could not ask. I suddenly remembered that I have not taken revenge for Tang Nuoyu. System, I'm really worried for Tang Nuoyu. Tang Guo smiled and said to the general manager, "Go and summon the Moon King into the palace. She has recovered for so long, her brain and body should be almost recovered. As the only Moon King of the West Saint country, she should share the country's worries." General Manager, inexplicably, I feel a little cold. "Yes, Your Majesty." Tang Nuoyu was originally basking in the sun and eating grapes in the courtyard. When the general manager suddenly issued a decree, she almost fell down in fright. The Empress wanted to see her. Why did she think of her? She shouldn't have done anything to offend the Empress recently, right? The last time Su Qing wanted to get close to her, she chased him away. The Empress' younger sister shouldn't be a petty person. Perhaps there was something else. Tang Nuoyu changed her clothes. When she came out, she saw a worried Shan Ji. "Don't worry. The Empress probably has other important matters to attend to." Dan Ji also knew about what had happened in Nanyun Chuan. Therefore, when he heard the Empress summon the Moon King, he was very worried. The Moon King didn't seem very reliable. Ever since they had a good talk last time, he actually treated him quite well. On the other hand, Xiao Jin, that bitch, did try to sow discord between him and the Moon King. The Moon King wanted him to agree on the surface and tell him secretly at night. He also said that Xiao Jin was a hostage from a neighboring country, so it wasn't convenient to deal with him openly. He told Xiao Jin to put on an act and not take it to heart. The Moon King had already said so, and he was indeed very good to him in secret. Other than Xiao Jin and Yin Qiu, there was no one else these days. Compared to the backyard of many nobles, his place was really much quieter, and he even received the sincere treatment of the Moon King. Because of this, he was very satisfied. After receiving benefits, he felt that it was still necessary to be of one mind with the Moon King. Only then would his days be better. As expected, the Moon King treated him even better, so he had to manage this backyard well. As for Xiao Jin, let him jump around. One day, the Moon King would think of a way to deal with him. Chapter 938. Greetings, Your Majesty. Tang Nuoyu bowed to Tang Guo with trepidation. She was especially polite and serious, afraid that her Empress sister would remember the past. "All right, you may rise, Moon King." "Thank you, Your Majesty." The Emperor's words were just words to be taken lightly, but she still had to bow when she should. Seeing this, Tang Guo couldn't help but smile. This Tang Nuoyu looked stupid on the surface, but in fact, after being reborn twice, she had indeed become much smarter, and there was also a feeling of great wisdom that appeared to be stupidity. "Sit down." Tang Nuoyu quickly sat down, and only half of her butt was left. She was really well behaved and respectful. "How is your body recovering? Are there any sequelae?" Hearing that the Empress sister was concerned about her, Tang Nuoyu's heart relaxed. Moreover, the Empress didn't mention what happened before, so it was obvious that she really didn't care about it. "I'm recovering very well, and there are no other symptoms." "Thank you, Your Majesty, for your concern." Tang Guo smiled faintly and nodded. Then I'm relieved. Moon King. Tang Nuoyu quickly sat up straight. The Empress sister must have something to tell her. She lowered her eyes slightly and didn't look directly at the Empress sister's face. She really couldn't find fault with the rules. Since your body has recovered, it's time to do some practical things. I only have you as my biological sister. In the past, you were in poor health and couldn't share the country's worries. Now that your body has recovered, you should go to the places where you are needed. Tang Nuoyu was confused. What places would she be needed for? Recently, I received a secret report that corrupt officials have appeared in various places, so the first thing I need you to do is to go to these places and help me investigate. As long as the evidence is conclusive, there's no need to report, just kill them directly. Tang Nuoyu's heart sank. Wasn't it a little inappropriate for the Empress sister to carry out such a heavy task? Why, Moon King, do you have any questions? Tang Nuoyu quickly shook her head. No, I'm just thinking about how to proceed. So that's how it is. I will send 2 officials to follow you. They are both old officials of the court and are loyal to the West Saint Empire. If there are many things you don't understand, you can ask them for guidance. Tang Nuoyu breathed a sigh of relief. That was good. Although she had lived for a few lifetimes, she was still clueless about officialdom. Since the Empress trusted her so much, she naturally couldn't disappoint her. Since they were sisters, they had to help each other, didn't they? As long as they were united, they wouldn't be afraid of anyone trying to sow discord between them. She had originally wanted to be an idle prince, but the Empress seemed to be unwilling and had to use her. She could not refuse. If she refused, that would be too cowardly. The Empress had always been a diligent person. She would look down on her elder sister and think that she was very useless. Yes, Your Majesty. Tangwa smiled, but Tang Nuoyu did not notice her expression. You can leave tomorrow. Don't worry about your safety. I will send a group of people to protect you. Thank you, Your Majesty. When Tang Nuoyu heard this, she laughed so hard that she almost forgot herself. A row of neat teeth was revealed. But she remembered something and quickly stopped. She cupped her hands and thanked the Empress. After Tang Nuoyu left, Tangwa leisurely took a sip of tea. It's not bad to have a sister. At least I don't have to do this kind of hard work. System, the host is very insidious. He had seen those memorials before. There was more than one place where the corrupt officials were involved. Tang Nuoyu would not be able to find out without 3 to 5 years of investigation. She left happily now, but when the time came, she would cry for her father and mother. The host's revenge was really amazing. Tang Nuoyu would probably die of exhaustion. Chapter 939. Chief Steward, send all the secret memorials to Moon King. She will leave tomorrow. She can take these memorials with her on the road and read them slowly. The chief steward's mouth twitched and he quickly replied, Yes, Your Majesty. This servant will go right away. The chief steward recalled the basket of secret memorials and observed a moment of silence for Moon King. He didn't know if Her Majesty valued the Moon King or if she wanted to punish the Moon King. This kind of matter was not easy to deal with. It would take at least 3 to 5 years to figure it out. Tang Nuoyu returned to the residence happily. Her husband, Dan Ji, immediately asked, Your Highness, does Her Majesty have any orders? Dan Ji was relieved to see that Tang Nuoyu was fine. Now that he and His Highness were on the same page, nothing must happen to her. Her Majesty has something important to instruct this prince. This prince can confirm that this is Her Majesty's affirmation and consideration. Therefore, this prince must handle this matter properly for Her Majesty. Dan Ji's face also lit up. He was actually quite smart and didn't ask what it was. He hesitated for a moment and asked, Then is Your Highness going out? Yes, I'm going out. I probably won't be back for a while. Tang Nuoyu recalled that there was still a restless Xiao Jin in the estate. She narrowed her eyes and beckoned to Shan Ji. Shan Ji bent down in front of her and heard her whisper to him, After this prince leaves, you'll be in charge of the estate. You can deal with any restless things as you please. Aside from not harming anyone's life, you can do whatever you want. If you really can't deal with it, you can go and see His Imperial Highness. Tang Nuoyu understood a little. Her imperial younger sister only doted on His Imperial Highness after she lost her memory. In fact, she had initially suspected that her imperial younger sister had been transmigrated. She had seen her a few times, but the imperial younger sister still gave her the same feeling as before. It was strange that she had forgotten all the men in the harem except for His Imperial Highness. Tang Nuoyu didn't think too much about this. Her imperial younger sister hadn't been transmigrated and now she was entrusted with an important task. She had to perform well. Being a useful prince was better than being an idle prince. The Empress' younger sister was able to tolerate what happened last time. It was clear that she was not a narrow-minded ruler. As long as she was respectful, she should be able to live a good life. Upon hearing Tang Nuoyu's words, Dan Ji felt relieved. It seemed that the prince was sincere to him. He even said such words. The restless person was probably Xiao Jin. Dan Ji recalled what she had accidentally seen before. Your Highness, I discovered that Xiao Jin had sneaked out before. He knows martial arts, so it's not easy to send someone to follow him. I don't know where he went. You don't have to worry about things outside the mansion. Our Empress is very powerful. If there's anything wrong and you can't handle it, you can go directly to the palace and report to the imperial husband. Do you understand? I will send some people to stay by your side to protect you. Do whatever you want to do. Of course, Tang Nuoyu did not like Xiao Jin. His identity was complicated and his skills were not bad. She couldn't kill him directly. This Dan Ji was tactful. She could give Dan Ji the power to deal with Xiao Jin. She was indeed using him, but she could promise Dan Ji glory for the rest of his life. He was a smart man and knew what to do. He wouldn't mind. Sure enough, there was only joy on Dan Ji's face. He quickly said that he would. The next day, Tang Nuoyu quietly got into a plain carriage and headed out of the imperial city. Damn! Why do I feel like I've been tricked? Chapter 940. When she left the imperial city, she saw a big box of secret memorials from all over the country. She couldn't help but curse. Everything here? She asked the person beside her. Her hands were shaking as she held the secret memorials. Why are there so many? Why didn't you remind me when you sent them here yesterday? Your Highness said to put them aside and read them in the carriage tomorrow. Your Highness already knows so much, Tang Nuoyu, so you didn't tell her. There are actually hundreds of secret memorials, and each one is from a different place. So when can she return to the imperial city? Tang Nuoyu held the secret memorials in her hands, tears streaming down her face. So, is the Empress giving me an important task or playing with me? Your Highness, the chief steward sent a message. Yesterday, you also said that he would tell you today. Tang Nuoyu sighed. This subordinate was a little unreliable. Tell me, what is it? The chief steward said that Her Majesty wants Your Highness to investigate the case well. You can come back to the palace once every new year to have a reunion with her. The rest of the time, Your Highness will have to work hard. Tang Nuoyu continued to sigh. Got it. It seemed that the Empress wanted to put her in an important position. Looking at the box of secret memorials, she felt a lot of pressure. When she thought of the two officials who came with her, she felt a little better. Those two were old officials in the imperial court who were loyal to the imperial family. The Empress sent them to her, which showed how much importance she attached to this matter. Now that the same situation was happening in so many places, she couldn't be lazy. Although she didn't understand a lot of things here, she was still a new generation in the 21st century. She had heard so many stories about the ancient people, so she still had some knowledge. She could think about using this knowledge to investigate the case. Tang Nuoyu opened the secret memorials resignedly. She was a little angry after reading 2 or 3 of them. No wonder the Empress attached so much importance to it. Just reading the contents made her angry. Tang Nuoyu began to investigate the case without complaint, while Tang Guo went to court on time every day. In her spare time, she watched Jing Cheng practice swordsmanship. When they were together, they were more like an ordinary couple. In the beginning, there were still ministers who wanted to stuff their wives into the harem. However, after Tang Guo pulled on their pigtails a few times, no one dared to say anything. They understood that the empress had really grown up and become unyielding. She was not someone they could control. Seeing Tang Guo's toughness, Jing Cheng was very satisfied. At first, the members of the Jing family were still in fear and trepidation, but after seeing that the empress was sincere to Jing Cheng, they became even more loyal to the empress. Chapter 941. At first, many people thought that the empress sent Tang Nuoyu because she was afraid of her. Later, they saw that the empress would celebrate with Tang Nuoyu every year and treated her like a sister. Tang Nuoyu had also been loyal to the empress. Those thoughts that they shouldn't have in their hearts were also unloaded. However, they didn't know that every time Tang Nuoyu left the imperial city, she would leave with a box of secret memorials. She said goodbye to Prince Danji and sat in the carriage. Looking at the box of secret memorials in the corner of the carriage, she sighed and said, "Sister Empress doesn't treat me as a person. Does she think that I'm a perpetual motion machine? Your Highness, this is because Her Majesty values you. Look, Her Majesty has never given these to anyone else." Tang Nuoyu muttered, "I always feel that Sister Empress is playing tricks on me. Is she still holding a grudge against me for what happened back then? If that's the case, is it too late for me to admit my mistake now? Your Highness, there are many secret memorials. I think it's more important to read them first. The original plan of 3 years may not be finished." Tang Nuoyu's mouth twitched. She picked up the memorials and read them with resignation. She looked at the scenery outside the window and said, "If it can't be finished in 3 years, then it will be 5 years. If it can't be finished in 5 years, then it will be 10 years. She had a faint smile on her face. "As long as I, Tang Nuoyu, am here, these people won't be able to get away with it." In these 2 years, she had learned a lot. She was no longer the Tang Nuoyu in the beginning. She did encounter many difficulties when completing the tasks given to her by the Empress. If she was still the modern her, she might feel that she couldn't complete them and give up. But when she took these tasks as her responsibility, she suddenly found that there was a solution to every problem. She wasn't a smart person, but she could learn many smart methods. She wasn't a fool. As long as she was willing to learn, she could gain a lot of experience. From the panic at the beginning to the indifference now, she had grown a lot. Actually, she should be thankful to her Empress sister. If it weren't for these difficult missions, Tang Nuoyu would only be the Tang Nuoyu who only knew how to use petty tricks and planned to be an idle prince for the rest of his life. Unlike the current Tang Nuoyu who was full of vigor and hope for life and felt that every day was meaningful. It was a bit of a rush, but every time she dug out those bad things, she would receive the gratitude of countless people. She felt proud and touched. She believed that this kind of life was truly meaningful. As for the love that she had been entangled with in the past, it was really meaningless. She didn't hate Xiao Jin as much as she did in the beginning. After all, they had different paths and each had their own standpoints. She had already let it go and taken her revenge. Now, she was going to start a new life. And Dan Ji was her husband. This Dan Ji was different from the Dan Ji in her previous life. In this life, he obeyed her. He was a very smart person. She was sure that Dan Ji would be like this for the rest of his life. Maybe she couldn't give Dan Ji a lot of love, but she could give him a lifetime of glory. She wasn't interested in men. Although she wore the skin of a female noble prince, she still had the mindset of a modern person. She could live by the rules here, but she didn't have to be like the people here who had 3 husbands and 4 servants. "I've grown up enough." The system was stunned when it heard Tang Guo's words. "Host, what are you talking about? What do you mean by growing up enough?" Chapter 942. In the past 5 years, Tang Nuoyu had been ordered by Tang Guo to travel all over the country to investigate the corrupt officials. Wherever there was darkness, she would be there. Tang Nuoyu had undergone a qualitative change from the initial stumbling to the current ease of handling a butcher's blade. Jing Cheng seemed to have noticed something. After practicing swordsmanship one day, he walked back to Tang Guo with a sword in his hand. He pinched her chin and kissed her. "Guo, I have a question that has been bothering me for a long time." "What do you want to know?" Tang Guo smiled. Her indulgent gaze made Jing Cheng's heart warm. He threw the sword to the palace servant, squatted in front of her, and held her hands. Tang Nuoyu. In the beginning, Tang Nuoyu looked very stupid, but she was actually quite smart. However, after so many years, anyone could see the changes in Tang Nuoyu. It was because Tang Guo had single-handedly facilitated the changes in Tang Nuoyu. For this reason, she had specially sent 2 old officials to follow Tang Nuoyu. The more he felt uneasy about her, the more he felt. "Guo, why did you nurture Tang Nuoyu like this?" Jing Cheng finally asked. Tang Guo held his face and looked straight into his eyes. "Do you want to hear the truth?" "Yes," Jing Cheng replied. "If I ask Guo, I definitely only want to hear the truth." Tang Guo's lips curved. "Then it's a promise. After you hear it, you are not allowed to be angry or sad." "Okay." Jing Cheng agreed, but in fact, he felt more and more uneasy. He held Tang Guo's hand tighter and tighter. He had asked the imperial physician. She was in good health. As for being infertile for a long time, he did not care about that. He only cared about Guo. At first, he had asked the imperial physician to check himself and make sure there was no problem. So, it was Guo's health. As long as it did not endanger her life, he did not care about children at all. "Ah Cheng." "Yes. I may only have a dozen years left to live," Tang Guo said calmly. After transmigrating through so many worlds, the only thing she couldn't control was her fixed lifespan, which could only be extended by 20 years at most. Actually, she was a contented person. After coming to her senses, she could use her own abilities to change her life and obtain a lot. However, there was nothing he could do about his lifespan. As expected, Jing Cheng was startled. He said in disbelief, "I've asked the imperial physician. Your body is very healthy. It is very good, but there are still only a dozen years left. Ah Cheng, don't be sad. If you are obedient, you will meet me again in your next life." Although she didn't know who Jing Cheng was, whether they had any relationship in the past, whether they were enemies or friends, she didn't mind falling in love with him since he was so cute when they didn't have any memories of the past. As for the future, that was a matter for the future. In the future, when he regained his memories, if he really was an enemy, then he would take revenge on his own. If it wasn't an enemy, then it would be a new world. To her, there was no difference. She was very clear. She would settle things in one world and never bring them to the next world. Jing Cheng paused for a long time. Finally, he buried his head in her knees and said, "Okay, I will be obedient. Guo must find me in the next life. I will also work hard to meet Guo earlier." Tang Guo smiled and said, "Of course I can recognize you at a glance." Jing Cheng thought of the scene when they met. "Guo, do you remember our previous life? That's why you smiled at me when you met me that day to attract my attention." Now that he thought about it, it was really possible. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.